They always saw me as the disappointment, the one who couldn't quite get it right. While they bragged about my sister's achievements, they never asked what I was building in silence. But some truths don't need to be shouted, they just need the right moment to be seen. And that moment? It changed everything. Let me take you back to where it began. They said I was a disappointment. That I'd wasted my potential. That I'd never amount to anything worthwhile. I didn't defend myself. I didn't argue. I just smiled because I already knew something they didn't. Something that would turn their whole world upside down. But before we get to that moment, let me take you back to a cold October morning in Madison, Wisconsin. Back to the exact second I heard my own mother say, "That girl will never get it together," as she poured coffee into a chipped mug for my sister, Paige. She didn't know I was standing just outside the kitchen doorway. If you've ever felt invisible in your own home, if you've ever been the sibling they looked through instead of at, then this story is for you. Tap subscribe and stick with me because what happened next changed everything. My name is Renee Clark. I'm 34 years old, single, and according to my family, still finding my path. They don't know that I found it years ago. They just never cared enough to notice. To them, I'm still the girl who dropped out of 2 master's programs, the one who worked nights at a co-op and lived in a studio apartment over a laundromat. They never asked why I left grad school. They never asked what I was building in the early hours before dawn, what I was really doing with all that freelance marketing work. They didn't know because I didn't tell them. I learned a long time ago that in a family like mine, where love is conditional and success is currency, silence is safer than honesty. They focused all their attention on Paige. Beautiful, polished Paige with her Northwestern degree and a fiancé who owns a chain of dental clinics. Paige who always knew the right thing to say at Sunday brunch and never forgot to send thank you cards. To my parents, she was the dream realized. I was the footnote. So, when I casually mentioned that I had a job interview coming up at Crescent and Holt, one of the fastest rising creative firms in Chicago, the reaction was underwhelming. "Fingers crossed, sweetheart," Dad muttered over his newspaper. Mom didn't even look up. "That's great, honey," she said, already back to discussing flower arrangements for Paige's bridal shower. What they didn't know, what they'd never imagined, is that for the past 18 months, I had been consulting for Crescent and Holt under a contract tied to a shell company I created. I was the strategist behind 2 of their most successful brand overhauls. My work had already been quietly passed around at board meetings under a codename. And now they were ready to bring me in for an interview. A formality. A reveal. The beginning of something they couldn't ignore. I never told my family because I needed to see something first. I needed to know how they'd speak about me when they thought I was still nothing. And that morning in the kitchen I got my answer. She applied at Crescent and Holt, my mother's side. I just don't see it happening. She's too scattered. No follow-through. "Paige, you should apply there. You'd be perfect. Mention your uncle's name if you reach out on LinkedIn." I stood frozen outside the window, the wind cutting through my jacket like her words had through my heart years ago. But this time I didn't feel the sting. Not really. Just a deep, calm clarity. Because they had no idea I already owned the room Paige wanted to walk into. And I was about to show them exactly what that failure had built in the dark. She applied at Crescent and Holt, my mom said with a sigh as she sliced a pear over the sink. "I just don't see that going anywhere. Renee's always been scattered. But you, Paige, you'd be perfect there. You should message someone on LinkedIn. Mention Uncle Todd's name." I didn't move. I was standing just outside the patio door, half hidden by the sliding curtain. I'd only meant to drop off a sweater I'd borrowed from Dad. But those words stopped me cold not because they stung. Not anymore. I'd been called unreliable, difficult, too sensitive, too cerebral my whole life. What startled me was the ease with which she said it. Like it wasn't even a betrayal. Like I wasn't a person at all, just a topic to brush aside before moving on to Paige's latest promotion or wedding update. Later that evening, Paige posted a photo of herself at a tech gala in Milwaukee. She stood next to a Crescent and Holt logo backdrop, holding a champagne glass like it was part of her brand. The caption, "Next chapter? Let's see where this leads. #dreamjob #manifesting." I didn't comment. I didn't call her out. Because for once I didn't have to fight to be seen. I had already been seen by the right people. The truth? The deal had already closed. The board had already signed off. And in just under 2 weeks, Crescent and Holt would officially become a public firm, with me as its majority shareholder. It took me 3 years. 3 years of working through proxy consultants, private acquisitions, and layered shell companies to build silent control. I didn't need my family's permission. I didn't even need their belief. All I needed was for them to keep underestimating me. And they did. I watched as Paige suddenly took an interest in branding. She started reposting design articles, quoting thought leaders she'd never read, and tagging Crescent and Holt in her content like it was fate. My mother beamed every time she mentioned Paige exploring new opportunities. My dad even joked about how Paige would modernize their whole digital division. I nodded along, smiled, took notes. Because sometimes revenge isn't fire and fury. It's slow, deliberate. It's watching someone build a ladder you already own and letting them climb it, rung by misguided rung until they walk right into your office. The moment was coming, and it started with a toast. At our next family dinner, Mom's roast chicken, wine glasses clinking, Paige raised her glass and said, "To fresh starts. You never know what doors will open if you stay ready." They all smiled. Mom clinked her glass to Paige's. Dad gave her that proud dad grin. I just took a sip of water and offered a small smile. Because I already knew exactly which door she was about to walk through. Mine. The official interview at Crescent and Holt was scheduled for Monday at 10 a.m. sharp. All weekend, Paige hovered over me like a well-meaning mentor, coaching me as if I were the underdog. "Renee, you've got to lead with charm, not just analytics," she said, perched on my couch in yoga pants and a designer hoodie. "These execs don't want spreadsheets, they want vision. And maybe wear something that brings out your eyes. First impressions are everything." I nodded, lips tight. Let her believe I needed her wisdom. Let her believe I was just another nervous applicant. What she didn't know was that I had reviewed the entire candidate roster the night before. And I was the one who had added her name. Because I wanted her to walk through those doors. I wanted her to sit at that table. And I wanted her to see with her own eyes exactly who she had been underestimating all along. Here's what the last decade taught me. People show their truest selves when they think you're beneath them. And I needed to see up close who Paige became when she thought I was chasing after her spotlight. Spoiler, she didn't hold back. That Monday morning, I arrived at the Crescent and Holt downtown office 20 minutes early. The lobby was sleek, glass, steel, and sunlight pouring across minimalist furniture. I waited by the entryway just long enough to catch Paige arriving in a crisp ivory pantsuit, every strand of her highlighted hair in place, phone in hand, posture immaculate. She didn't even glance up. "Oh good, you made it," she said flatly, as if my presence was a minor miracle. "Just be yourself in there, okay? Even if it's not totally your vibe." She still thought we were both candidates. Still thought this was some family rivalry she was already winning. We were called upstairs by the same assistant. Paige assumed it was random. It wasn't. I'd had our interviews scheduled back-to-back on purpose. She went in first, and I sat in the waiting area flipping through an old marketing trade journal, listening through the glass walls to the predictable cadence of her pitch. Personal branding, cultural synergy, a few buzzwords strung like pearls. It was all flash, no depth. The board had heard this routine 100 times. 15 minutes later, she walked out looking smug. "They seemed interested," she whispered like we were in on some inside joke. "Good luck, Renee." I smiled. "Thanks." Then I stepped into the same glass-walled conference room. But the energy changed instantly. Every board member stood as I entered. "Miss Clark," said Stephen Alden, the chairman. His expression was measured, but the gleam in his eyes gave it away. "Shall we begin?" I didn't sit across from them. I walked to the head of the table and took my seat. Calm. Certain. Cameras were already recording, not to evaluate me, but to document the transition. This wasn't an interview. This was my first act as majority shareholder. I spoke with steady confidence, outlining a vision for Crescent and Holt that centered on transparency, brand integrity, and creative authenticity. I used metrics no one else had access to. Because I wasn't presenting a case. I was presenting a future I had already built. 20 minutes later I stood, thanked them for their time and added, "I'm excited to guide this company into its next chapter." As I exited the room, I passed Paige standing near the elevator, still waiting, still assuming I'd been speaking to upper management. "They asked some great questions," I said with a serene smile. She blinked, caught off guard. "Well, let's hope one of us gets it." I nodded. "Oh, I'm sure one of us will." That night our family group chat lit up like clockwork. "Mom, Paige, any updates? Sending positive energy your way." "Dad. Renee. Even if it's just practice, we're proud of you for trying." "Paige. They said they'd follow up by Friday." Fingers crossed. I didn't say a word. Because I already knew what Friday would bring. At precisely 9:03 a.m., Paige sat at the kitchen island, nervously refreshing her inbox while our parents hovered like directors backstage on opening night. Her phone rang. She answered on speaker. "Hi, this is Paige Clark." A bright voice responded. "Hi Paige, this is Melanie from Crescent and Holt. Thank you again for your time earlier this week. We really enjoyed meeting you." Paige straightened, lips parting in anticipation. "But after careful review, we've decided to move in a different direction. We really appreciate your interest and wish you the best." There was a moment of stunned silence. Then Paige murmured, "Okay. Thank you." The line disconnected. My mom blinked in disbelief. "But, your interview was great, wasn't it?" I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, the steam curling up like punctuation. "Sometimes," I said calmly, "it's not just about a polished pitch. It's about alignment." Paige looked up at me then, and something in her expression shifted, like she suddenly knew she'd missed something important. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I just took a sip of my coffee, because her lesson had only just begun. The call ended. Paige's hand slipped from the phone as her face went slack. Just blank shock. "They said no," she whispered. Mom blinked. But your interview went great. Didn't it?" I stirred my coffee gently, the ceramic mug warm in my hands. "Sometimes it's not about the performance," I said quietly. "It's about the fit." Paige looked up. Our eyes met, just for a second, and in that moment something cracked in her expression, confusion at first, then suspicion. Her mouth parted slightly, but she said nothing. I gave her a small smile. Better luck next time. But that moment wasn't the peak. Not even close. The real shift was coming Monday morning, at exactly 8 a.m., when Crescent and Holt would make its formal leadership announcement. An internal email, a LinkedIn update, and a press release all synchronized to go live at once. And this time, no one in my family would be able to brush it off, spin it, or explain it away. If you've ever imagined the day people finally see you, really see you, for everything you've built in silence, then you'll understand how I felt when I woke up that Monday morning. At 7:58 a.m., the company-wide email landed. Subject: Leadership Update. Crescent and Holt names new CEO. Inboxes pinged. LinkedIn feeds lit up. The news spread like wildfire through industry groups and professional circles. Within minutes, texts started flying in, former coworkers, ex-professors, clients I hadn't heard from in years. Suddenly everyone remembered who I was. But the message that gave me pause wasn't from a colleague. It came through our family group text. "Mom, Renee? Is this real?" "Paige, wait. Are you that Renee Clark?" "Mom again. Please tell me this isn't some kind of joke." I didn't reply. I let the silence do what my voice never could. At 8:10 a.m. I stepped into the Crescent and Holt building. Not as a hopeful candidate, not as the shadow of someone else's expectations, but as the CEO. The atrium buzzed with quiet energy. Employees gathered by the railing, peering down into the open floor below. Camera crews had set up at the back, ready to stream the announcement to our satellite offices. My assistant, Layla, handed me a black folder with the printed address inside. "All set," she said softly. "Whenever you're ready." I exhaled slowly and walked toward the podium. The room fell into a hush. "Good morning," I said, voice steady. "By now, you've probably seen the announcement. Crescent and Holt has named a new chief executive officer. That CEO is me." There were a few gasps, a pause, then silence. I've spent the last year working behind the scenes, observing, listening, learning, not because I had to, but because I wanted to understand this company from within. From your perspective. Heads turned. Eyes locked on me, some surprised, some intrigued. But starting today, we move forward, with transparency, integrity, and a renewed sense of purpose. We're not just a creative firm. We're a movement. The applause started in pockets, then grew louder. And in that moment, I wasn't the girl who dropped out. I wasn't the failure they dismissed. I was the leader. People started leaning in, eyebrows raised, phones lowered. I had their attention now. Crescent and Holt was founded on bold campaigns and brave storytelling, I said, letting each word land. But somewhere along the way, we started favoring safety, familiar faces, predictable strategies, titles over talent. I paused, letting the silence hold the weight. I believe we're ready for more. A longer beat. Then I stepped forward slightly. My name is Renee Clark. I own Crescent and Holt. And I plan to lead this company with transparency, with courage, and with the kind of creativity this industry has nearly forgotten. It started softly. 2 people in the front row clapping. Then another. Then it swelled. Applause filled the atrium like a wave breaking. Layla gave me a small nod from the side. The team saw me now, not as an assistant consultant or a quiet strategist, but as the person who had quietly been shaping their future all along. But this moment wasn't just for them. It was for the girl who used to leave family dinners early so she wouldn't cry in the car. For the young woman who smiled politely while her own mother said she'd never stick with anything. For every person told they were too much, too odd, too soft, and then used as a punchline at their own kitchen table. After the applause faded and the cameras powered down, I returned to my office. That's when the messages started. Dad. Why didn't you tell us? Mom, we're stunned. You completely blindsided us, Renee. Paige, you humiliated me. I was just trying to help you. And now I look like a complete idiot. I stared at Paige's message for a long time. She was right about one thing. She did look like a fool. But not because of anything I did. She did that to herself by pretending I was something to be pitied. By assuming she could edge me out of something she never really understood. By using me as a foil to make herself shine brighter. Still, I didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, I sent Layla a quick note. Reserve the main conference room for Wednesday evening. Grant access for 3 visitors. Quietly arrange for the meeting to be recorded. Because if they were going to confront me, I wanted clarity. I wanted documentation. I wanted the masks off. Wednesday came faster than I expected. Paige arrived first. Same blazer from her interview, pressed and purposeful, like she was stepping into a second round. Her expression was sharp, tight. Mom followed close behind, arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin line. Dad came last, trying to balance quiet pride with something more brittle. Embarrassment, maybe. Fear. Or just confusion that his family had changed without his permission. They sat across from me at the long glass table. So, Mom began, her voice clipped. This is really happening. It is, I said calmly. You should have told us, Dad added, jaw tight. We're your family. Paige leaned forward, fire rising. Was this your plan? Letting me apply? Letting me believe I had a chance? That's cruel, Renee. I met her eyes. You did have a chance. Just not the one you imagined. Mom shook her head. We were caught off guard. Completely blindsided. You should have warned us. I nodded once. I know. That's exactly why I didn't. Their brows furrowed. I needed to see who would show up when they thought I had nothing to offer. And now I have my answer. Because the people who once brushed me off like lint on a sleeve were now sitting in my office, facing a version of me they never thought was real. And for the first time, they weren't the ones holding the power. But the most staggering part? They still didn't realize what was coming next. The room had gone still. Too still. Across the table, my family sat with eyes darting between shock, defensiveness, and something none of them would ever say aloud, fear. For the first time, they weren't holding the script. I was. Mom crossed her arms tightly, as if bracing against a wind she couldn't control. So what is this then? She asked, her tone brittle. Revenge. No, I replied, voice even. This is accountability. A conversation you've avoided for 34 years. Paige's jaw tightened. If you had something to prove, you could have done it privately. This spectacle, this stunt, you embarrassed all of us. I tilted my head. You mean like when you applied to Crescent and Holt knowing I was interviewing there? When you reached out to 3 of our board members and tried to sell yourself as the better cultural fit? She blinked. I didn't. Yes, you did. I slid a printed email chain across the table. Here's your outreach. Your glowing references to your MBA, your family name, and how Renee struggles with leadership presence. Want me to read it aloud? Her mouth opened, then shut. She couldn't deny it. Mom looked between us, clearly shaken. Dad leaned back, exhaling loudly through his nose, rubbing his temple like the facts were just too heavy to hold. I didn't think you'd actually get the job, Paige muttered. I thought maybe you were in over your head. I narrowed my eyes slightly. Or maybe you needed me to stay small so you could stay elevated. You're twisting everything, Mom snapped, her voice sharp. We helped you. All those times we sent money, helped cover rent. I stood slowly, the chair legs barely scraping the floor. No, you didn't help me. You reminded me I was failing. Every check came with a comment. Every so-called favor came with a warning. You didn't support me. You tolerated me. There's a difference. Silence fell again, heavy and raw. I walked to the windows. The lights of Chicago blinked outside, steady and different. I didn't build Crescent and hold to prove you wrong, I said quietly, still facing the skyline. I built it to prove me right. To remind myself that I was capable. That I mattered, with or without your approval. I turned to face them, my expression calm but unwavering. But somewhere along the way I realized I did want something. To stop shrinking. To stop making myself palatable so you wouldn't feel challenged. Paige's eyes shimmered. So what now? She whispered. We're just enemies? No, I said. We're not enemies. But I'm done pretending that you didn't try to undermine me. Dad finally broke the silence. You've made your point, Renee. You've succeeded. Congratulations. So what is it you want from us now? I walked back to my chair and sat, folding my hands on the table. I want acknowledgement, I said. Not congratulations. Just truth. I want to hear you say that you doubted me, that you tried to push me out, that what you said behind my back wasn't about my abilities, it was about your fear, your discomfort. Mom stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. Paige looked away. Because they weren't ready. Maybe they never would be. But I was. And I wouldn't let them rewrite the story this time. Mom stared at me like I just spoken another language. That's ridiculous, she said, voice tight. Paige shook her head slowly. I'm not saying I didn't believe in you. I just didn't expect this. I met her eyes. Exactly. And that's the problem. Silence stretched between us. Dad finally cleared his throat, his voice lower now. You've always been different, Renee. Not in a bad way. Just hard to reach. We never really knew how to help you. It was the closest thing to honest I'd ever heard him say. Then Mom stood abruptly, pushing her chair back a few inches. Well, I'm not sure what else you want from us. We came. We listened. If you want to keep dragging up old wounds, that's on you. She turned toward the door. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't move. You never really saw me, I said softly. Because seeing me meant admitting the daughter you dismissed was building something bigger than anything you imagined. Mom froze, her back still turned. She didn't respond. Paige stood slowly, not looking at me. I don't know how to fix this, she whispered. But maybe I wasn't the only one pretending. That line landed harder than I expected. For a brief moment I saw the version of her that wasn't competing. Just lost. They left without another word. Dad lingered a moment longer. He didn't speak, but the nod he gave me felt heavier than anything he'd said out loud. Then he followed them out. The door closed. The conference room felt still. Lighter even. Like the tension had drained from the walls. But inside me the storm hadn't fully passed. It was just starting to settle. They knew now. They'd seen it. The version of me they ignored, dismissed, minimized was real. And they couldn't unsee it. Not this time. I didn't walk out with their approval. I walked out with something better. Freedom. But here's the thing about revealing your power to people who were invested in your failure. They rarely handle it well. I thought they'd go quiet. Maybe reflect. Maybe even apologize. I was wrong. The next morning my LinkedIn inbox lit up. Not with congratulations, but with strange messages from people I barely knew. All of them had one name in common. My mother. Apparently, she'd started reaching out to distant acquaintances, quietly implying I'd manipulated my way into the CEO position. That I'd used unfair connections, or backdoor dealings. That I had stolen something that should have gone to someone more qualified. Translation page. One message in particular stopped me cold. Hey Renee, just a heads up. Your mom's been posting some weird stuff in a private alumni group. Might want to check it out. I clicked the link. And there it was. A public post dressed in vague disappointment. It's heartbreaking when someone you love chooses ambition over gratitude. Success should unite families, not divide them. Some people forget who helped them get where they are. Dozens of likes, comments, sympathy. My stomach turned. She wasn't just spinning the story. She was rewriting it. And this time I wasn't going to let her. I clicked the link and scrolled. There it was, a post polished and precise, dripping in passive aggression. It's painful to watch someone weaponize success, especially when all we ever did was believe in her. Family should be about lifting each other up, not tearing each other down for personal gain. Over 200 likes. Dozens of comments flooded underneath, many from names I vaguely remembered. Old neighbors, acquaintances, even a high school English teacher who once said I had potential if I stopped dreaming so big. The story had flipped. It wasn't Renee Clark becomes CEO. It was poor Paige. Poor parents. Look what Renee did to them. I should have felt angry, betrayed. But I didn't. Instead, I sat back and let the silence do the heavy lifting. Because here's what I've learned. When people can't control the truth, they try to control the narrative. So I said nothing. No comments. No clarifying posts. No retaliation. I let them craft their version of the story. But behind closed doors, I was saving everything. Every screenshot. Every group message where they mocked my ideas before knowing they were mine. Every voicemail page left in the middle of the night. Spiraling between jealousy and denial. You think this makes you someone? You think you're untouchable now? You're still not the real deal. You just fooled the right people. It was unraveling fast. At first, I thought it was just pride bleeding into panic. Paige struggling to adjust to the idea that the family underdog had rewritten the ending. But then it escalated. A week later, Crescent and Holt's HR director forwarded me an anonymous email. Subject: urgent. Concern regarding so conduct. The body was laced with accusations, claims I'd lied on my resume, forged experience records, even manipulated the board vote. Attached was a Google Drive link with documents labeled evidence. It was clumsy. Mismatched fonts, tampered dates, cropped headers, almost cartoonishly obvious. But procedure is procedure. We had to treat it seriously. Later that afternoon, I met privately with Martin, our board chair. He skimmed the file, then pushed it across the table with a tired sigh. It's nonsense, he said. But we'll go through protocol just to be safe. I nodded once. You think it's who I think it is? He didn't answer. Just gave me a long, deliberate look. That was enough. This wasn't just resentment anymore. It was sabotage, strategic and deliberate. And something in me shifted. That night, I sat in my apartment, surrounded by Chicago's flickering skyline. The manila folder still sat unopened on my lap. I didn't need to read it again, because something had finally settled inside me. I wasn't hurt. Not like before. I wasn't the girl holding her breath, wondering what she did wrong. I wasn't the woman begging her family to notice her. I wasn't even angry. I was just done. Done hoping they'd change. Done waiting for apologies. Done shaping myself to fit their comfort zones. So the next morning I made a call to our legal team. And with calm precision I authorized a cease and desist order, applicable to anyone spreading false claims about the company or its leadership, relative or not. The message was clear. You're welcome to have your version of events, but you don't get to rewrite mine. After the legal team issued the cease and desist notice, I sent one last message, this one directly to Paige. You've made your point. I'm not here to argue with you, but if you continue targeting my career, I will escalate this legally. And I won't hesitate. She didn't reply. No apology. No denial. Just silence. But the posts vanished. The calls stopped. The backchannel gossip dried up. And for the first time in years the noise faded. It's strange how the absence of chaos can feel louder than any argument. But I'd learned something powerful. Sometimes the clearest statement you can make isn't with words. It's with boundaries. I didn't tear my family apart. They did that themselves the moment they chose control over compassion, pride over connection. But I reclaimed something they never truly gave me. Peace. At Crescent and Holt we were scaling fast. The strategy teams doubled in size. International brands were reaching out for partnerships. The same companies I once studied at night in my studio apartment were now emailing me, asking for meetings. And as I sat in my office corner window skyline view, I realized something else. This wasn't revenge. It was recognition. Of myself. Of my value. Of everything I'd built not to spite them, but to prove myself right. Despite what they said. Despite what they did. Despite every attempt to tear me down. The failure they'd rolled their eyes at had become the CO they never saw coming. 6 months later, my life barely resembled the one I used to hide inside. Crescent and Holt was in talks to open a European hub. We'd onboard 2 Fortune 500 clients and launched a mentorship program for underrepresented voices in branding. What we were building wasn't just profitable, it was purposeful. And for the first time in over a decade, I wasn't bracing for backhanded compliments or quiet jabs across the dinner table. There were no more sideways glances. No more questions about when I'd settle down or get serious. Just the silence that follows a storm. The kind that lets you breathe. I hadn't spoken to Paige since the cease and desist. Not directly, but word travels. She'd quietly left her old job. A few recruiters had heard whispers about her involvement in the attempted smear campaign. The branding world is tighter than people think. Reputation echoes louder than resumes. As for my parents, nothing. No calls. No emails. Not even a text after we landed the front page of Marketing Today. They didn't show up at our winter gala, even though it was hosted just across the river. Then on a quiet Sunday morning, I found an envelope slipped under my apartment door. No return address. Just my name, Renee, in familiar script. Inside a single page. Renee, I've written and rewritten this more times than I can count. I know we haven't spoken since that night. And I understand if you don't want to hear from me. But I need to say this. You were right. I didn't really see you. I was too caught up in my own fear. Fear you'd fail, fear you'd outshine the daughter I held up as my greatest success. I confused silence for support and pride for love. You didn't need us to rise. But you deserved us. And I'm sorry you didn't have that. Whatever happens next, just know I see you now. Mom. I read it 3 times. Not because it made me cry. Not because I needed the apology. But because for the first time it sounded like her. Not the version dressed for Sunday brunch or board meetings. Just her. Honest. Raw. Real. It wasn't the polished version of my mother I'd grown up with. The one who posed for church bulletins or hosted brunches with Paige's friends, always performing for some invisible audience. No, this letter felt different. Stripped of pride. Unfiltered. Real. That evening, I tucked the letter into the bottom drawer of my office credenza. Not on a shelf. Not pinned to a vision board. Just filed away like the last page of a chapter one no longer needed to reread. Later that week, a new message appeared in my inbox. The sender page. I'm working at a startup now. Entry level. Learning everything from the ground up. You were right. I needed a wake-up call to see what I'd taken for granted. If you're ever open to it, I'd love to grab coffee. No pressure. No expectations. Just maybe start fresh. I didn't reply. Not immediately. I didn't delete it either. Because sometimes an apology isn't delivered in words. It arrives in changed behavior, in humility, in the courage to start from scratch. If this part of the story is hitting close to home, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. We've still got more twists to come. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Let's keep going. And that mattered more. As for me, I kept building. Not from bitterness. Not to prove them wrong anymore. But from vision, purpose, clarity. I no longer needed the people who once questioned me to clap from the sidelines. Their belief or lack of it was irrelevant. Because I had finally become the woman I used to dream about when I was the girl crying alone after family dinners. The woman who didn't beg for approval. She commanded respect, quietly, fiercely, relentlessly. And sometimes when the office is still and the city hums below me, I think about that day in the kitchen, the one where it all began. I can still hear her voice. That failure isn't going to achieve anything. If only she knew what she sparked. Because not all fires rage. Some burn slow, controlled, patient, until the day they rise high enough to reshape everything in their path. My story? It's not a tale of revenge. It's a reminder. A reminder of what happens when you stop asking for permission to matter. When you stop shrinking just to fit inside someone else's version of you. It's a story about choosing truth over comfort, vision over validation, self-worth over silence. And if you've ever been the one overlooked at the dinner table, the one dismissed, underestimated, told your dreams were too wild, too much, too impossible, I see you. You don't need their permission to succeed. You don't need their applause to rise. You only need to believe in the version of yourself they couldn't handle. Because one day they'll walk into a room and realize the nobody they dismissed now signs the paychecks. And trust me, that moment, it's worth everything. Thank you for hearing my story. Now I want to hear yours. Drop a comment below. Have you ever been counted out? What did you do when someone tried to dim your light? Let's make this space more than just storytelling. Let's make it a movement. Because your story matters. And your success, it's only just beginning.